So good morning, and thank you all for attending Three Valleys February 2025 Leadership Breakfast. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce some elected officials attending this meeting. You can either just stand up or wave your hand when you hear your name. So first, I'm going to start with my board. So from the Three Valleys Board of Directors, we have Vice President Carlos Goitia, Secretary Treasurer Jeff Hanlon, Director David DeJesus, Director Bob Kuhn, Director Jorge Marquez, and Director Jody Roberto. Okay. Representing Congressman Gil Cisneros' office, we have Christiane Salamat. Representing Assembly Member Blanca Rubio's office, Wendy Saavedra. Representing Assembly Member Michelle Rodriguez's office, Camille Hemsworth. The City of Claremont Mayor Corey Kaleke. And Vice Mayor Jennifer Stark. We have the City of Pomona Mayor Tim Sandoval. We also have Pomona Council Member Lorraine Canales. And Council Member Deborah Martin. And of course, thank you to all the elected water agency board members that are in the audience attending today. So thank you all for being here. So today we'll be getting an update on the Bay Delta and the Delta Conveyance Project. And it is my distinct honor to introduce today's guest speaker, Ms. Nina Hawk. Nina is the Bay Delta Initiative's Group Manager, Chief of Bay Delta Resources at Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Nina has over 20 years of experience, with 15 plus years working in government municipalities in leadership roles related to program and project management, operations management, and executive management. She provides strategic oversight and coordination on key projects and programs representing Metropolitan's interest, including the Delta Conveyance Project, the Sites Reservoir, and statewide Bay Delta water policy and strategic water partnerships. In 2022, Nina led an initiative to overhaul and update Metropolitan's Bay Delta policy framework, which was passed unanimously by Metropolitan's board and received support by water suppliers and NGOs alike. Ms. Hawk also oversees MWD's Bay Delta Science Program, serving on the policy group of the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, and helps to inform Bay Delta watershed and ecosystem habitat investments. So prior to Metropolitan, Nina served as the Chief Operating Officer of Valley Water's Water Utility Enterprise, where she managed activities ranging from imported water delivery to surface water and groundwater storage, recycling and purification, and water conservation and efficiency programs. Nina earned her bachelor's degree in civil and environmental engineering and her master's degree in public administration from San Jose State University. So please join me in welcoming Nina to the podium.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here this morning. Beautiful weather down here, down south. Up in Northern California, we've had quite a bit of storms and a little bit of sunshine, so it's been great. But coming here today and waking up with the sun shining has just been a real treat, and of course, seeing all of you. So I'm glad to be back here today because last time I was here, I was able to share a status update of what was going on in the Bay Delta California water This is a different moment. This is a moment where there's been a lot of work, a lot of time and energy from so many people across Southern California and, of course, the state to really advance and continue on a really major solution known as the Delta Conveyance Project. So I'm really happy to share more about this effort, where it's at today, because we've hit a major milestone as of end of last year. But before I jump into that, I'm just going to give a general overview of California water and how it fits into Metropolitan and how the water comes to us and some of the strains and stressors and challenges we face, because then you'll better appreciate what exactly the Delta Conveyance Project is about. So bear with me as I go through some of this if you've seen it before or you're familiar, but for those of you who might not be, I just want to give you a stage. I want to set it so you understand the importance of California water and how it moves to this region. So we'll start here. Metropolitan Water District serves 19 million people in Southern California, and the water we provide does not come directly from Metropolitan per se and its water supply. It comes from two major river systems. One is the State Water Project, which makes up about 30% of the water supply coming from the Northern Sierras. And that 30% can very much vary. It can be as low as 5% one year, all the way up to 60 another year. So it'll swing quite dramatically. If we have a really wet year or a lot of water we can move in, we'll move it down to Southern California. But on average, 30%. Then we have the Colorado River. It makes up at approximately 20%, and it is a big river system. Several different parties take water from this. Many states, including Mexico, take water from this river system as well. And so what we do is we bring those two sources in, we store those sources, and we deliver them across Southern California. Then we have the other remaining 50%. This is actually composed of a lot of local resources, everything from the Los Angeles aqueduct, so water coming through from the Eastern Sierras for LA. We also have a number of groundwater, and we also have conservation, desalination, and other efforts by the actual member agencies, so who we provide the water to, whether these are other water wholesalers, cities, and all the member agencies that we provide water to and their programs. So you can see we do it locally, but then we have these two major supplies that are coming from other states and also from the Northern Sierras that are coming to the region to make water come to life at the taps. All right, so a little bit about that State Water Project. We're going to zone in to Northern California and talk a bit about its value. So when we think about water, we know water itself doesn't cost money, but to move it, transport it, store it, to treat it, to make it safe to drink, we have to pay, and we have the consumer that pays for that, right? So over the years, the State Water Project, the one coming from Northern Sierras, we have paid $29.9 billion in total charges. Seems like a lot of money, but if you think about how much water we have received, it's been 44.3 million acre feet have been the total billed deliveries to the region since the inception of the State Water Project. And that equates to $674 per acre foot on average. This is a really excellent, affordable price point for imported water supply coming from either the Colorado or from State Water Project. But when you look at other water supply sources, oftentimes they cost a lot of money. If you're looking at wastewater and turning it into recycled water, if you're looking at some of the desalination efforts, or if you have to look at creating new supplies, they're going to be upwards of this. They're going to be in the thousands of dollars, $2,000 to $4,000 per acre foot. So this is a very affordable supply. And why is that important? Because of course it comes down to the region, and we know the cost of the supply will be passed through to the member agencies and eventually the consumer. So the big takeaway here is it's provided a lot of water to us. It has done so in an affordable way. So what does the water supply for the State Water Project actually do? There's a few key areas, or I would say attributes or qualities of this water that make it so important to Southern California. One of the reasons we look to this is that it actually helps with the local supply. So if we bring this water into the region, we know that we can provide this to a member agency. And let's say this member agency, water wholesaler, city alike, they want to go ahead and store water in their groundwater banking, or they have a conjunctive use program, or they're looking at keeping the salt levels down in their groundwater basins. This water will be integral for them in order to help them do that work within their service area. So this is a great quality water. We also know that when we look at our treatment systems at Metropolitan, some of the biggest water treatment plants in the United States, they need to also blend this water with other sources. And since it's a really great quality water, it has low salts and it has very little contaminants because it's coming from those high Sierras, coming from that snowpack. That then we're going to have lower treatment costs. This is great because then you can run those treatment plants with little additives or additional chemicals or additional treatment processes are needed. Then local groundwater storage, talked about that a second ago, the conjunctive use. We also have groundwater banking. So Metropolitan has invested throughout the years, and I don't know if you can see it here on the screen, the red dots are a little bit more of the reservoirs in the areas where we have groundwater banks. So we have partnered over the years with Central Valley or agricultural interests and placed our water during times of mass, a majority abundance of this water coming through the system. We need to put it somewhere. Sometimes we have enough of it to deliver and we've got all our storage full in Southern California. So we're going to put it in the Central Valley where we know it'll be there for us on a rainy, no pun intended, not a rainy day, during a drought. We'll be able to pull on that water and bring it into the area so that we do have enough water to supply to everyone. And another one is surface storage. There are other reservoirs across the state, including the San Luis Reservoir. It's a little closer. It's that blue dot closer to the Bay Area, along with a Diamond Valley Lake. Metropolitan built that lake just to take in this very water supply, the state water projects. And then, of course, we also have the need to look at long-term, how are we going to sustain our region? And by having this supply being provided with all this infrastructure already in play, we know we'll create for a longer-term ability to be flexible with other water supplies, like the Colorado, like the local programs and development that you all are doing at the region level. So with anything natural resource related, there is always going to be some kind of risk associated. If you think about it, we're traversing across the entire state of California to deliver this water to you across lands and waters and natural waterways. So this isn't just an easy delivery. This is really miles and miles and billions of dollars of infrastructure, both natural, green infrastructure, and gray infrastructure that delivers this water to our area. So there are threats associated with conveying that water all the way through the system. Three of the major ones that we are studying today and working on to essentially plan for to ensure we continue to get this affordable water supply is seismic threats, climate change, and regulatory. Those three areas are incredibly important to how the water moves from Northern California down to Southern California. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of them today. All right, we're going to start with seismic threats. So this is the Bay Area, and here's the delta that was highlighted there. And you can see if we have a seismic event in the delta, the red essentially is showing water is moving into the delta that is salt water. The Bay Delta is a beautiful place with a lot of ecosystems and beautiful serene areas, but it is a freshwater place. And so the salt water comes into the Bay Delta on the western side, and it comes in through tidal influence, but it typically stays in this range right here, so a little bit to the west. It doesn't creep all the way in, because if that salt water comes in too much, what happens is these pumping stations down here would take that salt water, and all of a sudden we would have very salty water coming to Southern California, which would be detrimental to the groundwater basin programs, the conjunctive use programs, the treatment plants, and then of course storing in those groundwater basins in the Central Valley. We don't want to introduce an abundant amount of salt into any kind of systems. We will create a complete water chemistry issue, and we'll have a lot of challenges in moving forward. So this is a huge concern for us as it relates to keeping this water supply pure and clean as it came from those Sierras, as it came down as snow. So just know seismic threats are huge. Another thing to note is some of the levees, or several of them in the Delta, they would be in a huge challenge and state of chaos if we lost them. So if they fail, and multiple at once, and typically a seismic event large enough will cause what's called like a ripple effect. The first line of levees would fail, more water would keep creeping in, the next line of levees would fail, etc., because of the pressure of that water moving through the system. You have a collapse of multiple levees like that, you are now going to be like Katrina. You're going to be in a huge, emergency recovery mode, trying to get those levees back up, or temporary ones back up, so that you can continue to move that water through the system. The other threat is related to, of course, species, has to do with fish. So we know in this region, in the Bay Delta region, there's a number of fish, and they are either listed or threatened. And what this means is that we can't just move the water and pump those pumps when we want to, because what we could do is we can entrain the fish. We can take the very limited amount of them left and either put them to the brink of extinction, or have a whole impact to the ecosystem and kind of the thriving way that they sustain the very small numbers left. So these are just a few of the species that we track, and this is important because these, if they do disappear for whatever reason, it's just like when you learned in grade school, it's essentially a food chain. If you lose one of them or you have an issue with one of them, you start to see a ripple effect throughout that ecosystem as well. And so because the Bay Delta does sustain with a number of species, we have over 400 that are unique to the region, you need to make sure that we do everything we can to keep them in good shape, we keep them healthy, so then we can go ahead and move and keep those pumps going and keep the water flowing through the system as well. So we want them to coexist. So climate change, I know it's a technical graph, but this graph is very, very important. I want to walk you through it. On the red side is what we are seeing into the future in 2020, 2027. The blue side is what we're seeing now. And essentially this is how the water is flowing. So we see the water right now in blue, the one to the right here. We see a nice snowpack staying steady, and it's holding on to the water and slowly melting throughout the year. And then by the time we get into fall, May, June, July, a little bit of sun comes out, we start to see a nice melt of that snowpack, and it starts to flow through the system. With climate change, what's going to be happening is we're going to be getting those storms coming in sooner and more aggressively, and then we're also going to be seeing that snowpack, because the temperatures are rising, isn't going to stay as long through the year. It's going to start melting sooner. So you're going to see a combined impact of a bunch of storms coming in sooner, and also you're going to see it melting sooner. So a lot of water coming through the system earlier in the year. And so this is less runoff in the spring, and you can see that's because we've got that snowpack coming through for drier conditions. But then that chunk of water right there, the blue one in blue, is now shifting to the red. Why is that important? Oh, it's still the same water going through the system, but it's a different part of the year. And the way the infrastructure was built, the way the reservoirs were built, the conveyance systems were built, the canals, the pumping systems, is predicated on coming through during this time of year. They're able to take it in that kind of pattern that's in the blue, not in the red. And the unfortunate part is, on that previous slide, I told you we have all those fish that we have to worry about. That's when the regulations are the strictest for pumping. And the reason being is that's when the fish are migrating through the system. So you can't be pumping water excessively during that time and also expect that we can take that abundant of water that's coming through the system. So essentially, we're going to be constrained. We're now going to see water that we always enjoyed not being made available later. So with climate change, everyone always wants to know, what does that mean to the water supply? How does that shift in hydrology? What does it really mean? Because we can't take it during that time, because we see the shift of that blue going to the red, we know that by 2070, we're going to have a 22% decline in our water supply. So the water supply we enjoy today from that State Water Project is going to be less available to us because of all the constraints I just showed you. So we know this information. So what do we do is in the water industry, we try really hard to plan. And so we look at all the risks and we say, what can we put into play to plan for this? So we're not left with such a declined water supply that we're in scarcity more than we should be. Droughts will occur, that's fine. We can plan for those. But to end in scarcity situations is far more difficult and hard for our communities and, of course, everything we've built up in Southern California, our economy. So what are we doing at Metropolitan? There are some near-term things that we're doing to deal with the concerns of climate change and some of the risks I showed you, because they're happening right now. So we are doing a few things at this time. One of them is levee maintenance. Remember how I mentioned those seismic threats? We've got to make sure those levees are always in good condition. So we're monitoring them. We're putting everything from drones out there to dogs to sniff out and find voids in the levees. But it's really interesting. The science has really gotten to the point that they can start to do satellite imagery of these levees, and they can actually see how they look and if there's any degradation, or if we need to go in and do additional maintenance or rehabilitate them. So it's really wonderful. We have a robust science program. Metropolitan does actually hire and have some of the top experts as it relates to those fish I showed you and the ecological terrestrial impacts we see in the Delta. That is important because then we can study it and we can influence, whether it be a new law, whether it be the state administration, the federal administration. We now have the science, the data to back up and better understand not only what's the best decision for the environment, but also what's going to allow for our water to still be reliable. So as a water agency, we're going to be looking at it from both perspectives, so we can give a better solution when we have scientists and people that actually understand this. And then, of course, before I get to Delta Conveyance, we're also looking at additional storage and conveyance options. We are looking right now, we have one storage program in the Central Valley known as AVEC, where we're investing in more groundwater storage, because we see if we're going to shift the hydrology and have a bunch of it coming to us, we need to pack that away. We need to put it into more storage. So you oftentimes will see that in the news or hear about that across California water, and it is incredibly true. We do need more storage in the state of California. Without it, in the future, we won't be able to optimize the water that's changing due to climate change. So now I'll pivot to the major conveyance solution that we've been looking at for years in this latest iteration of the project known as the Delta Conveyance Project. So what is the Delta Conveyance Project today? Many of you may know over the years this project has evolved. It's been in the making and it's been different iterations, but essentially it's a tunnel that goes underneath the Bay Delta, this very fragile area, and it delivers water from the top of the delta, where it's coming straight from the Sacramento River, where it's nice and fresh from that snowpack, goes all the way underneath the delta, eastern side, highlighted in yellow, all the way down to those pumping facilities in the southern side of the Bay Delta. This is really important. It's a massive tunnel, so it's not to be seen as something small. But what it allows us to do is really look at intaking water up to 6,000 CFS. That's a lot of water coming through. It's about a 42 foot diameter or length, 42 to 45 mile length pipeline. So imagine how massive that is. It's essentially going through the entire delta. And we know that for this reason, this is going to be a major diameter pipeline. It's going to be about 36 feet in diameter. It's huge. It's a tunnel. Think about when people are putting in trains or subways, things like that. It's a massive tunnel. Now, it would be substantially lower and underground. It'd be 140 to 70 feet deep, depending on where you're at in the delta. So it's not going to be near the top of the delta. That's really important. You don't want it to be adversely impacting communities or the delta itself. So you want it well underneath the delta. And the thickness of this, just to give you an idea, is over a foot and a half is the thickness of this. And that's to keep that structural integrity of this tunnel. So this is the solution at hand. Governor Gavin Newsom, when he came into office, he took what was previously a two-tunnel project or twin-tunnel project and took it down to one tunnel for a number of reasons when he first came into office. And so now we've worked on this tunnel with the Department of Water Resources and several other agencies because we see this is the viable solution at this time. And I'll talk a little bit about where the project's at today. So what would the Delta Conveyance Project do? It essentially bypasses the delta, allows us to move water underneath it so we aren't impacting said fish when we go to pump the water, and we're able to also move it during high flow events. So when it's raining and it's coming down hard, we can now pull that water, or if the snowpack's coming down at the same time as the rain, we can pull that water without adversely impacting the Bay Delta. All those risks and the threats I showed you can actually be managed well with a tunnel. Does not mean we would still not use water going through the delta. In fact, almost 80% of the water would still go through the delta and pumped for water supply. That 22% is what we're trying to figure out. How do we manage that 22% of water we're going to lose? So here's an example of the amount of water that came into San Luis Reservoir. San Luis Reservoir, reminder for those who don't know, is a massive reservoir that is right underneath the Bay Area that takes both state water supply and federal supplies. But we store water there. The state of California stores a bunch of water there for us, and we move that later in the year for use. So here's what it looked like without a tunnel. So all that space for 2024 was not filled or could not be filled for the water year because we didn't have enough water in the system to come through. And we had restrictions for pumping due to the fish. So if we had Delta Conveyance, we'd have been able to fill all that storage. We would have been able to make up the loss due to climate change, due to change in hydrology for the year, due to the impacts associated with pumping. So this is huge. We now know there's water there for us during a drought period. We're able to pull that water down into Southern California. Remember, affordable water supply. So really just a number of good things come with the ability to draw on that water from Delta Conveyance and make up that lost supply. The other thing is there's a lot of misnomers about how this tunnel would work. People just think, oh, it's going to, you might have seen historically, it's going to be a water grab. Southern California is going to take all the water and move it to Southern California. Quite the contrary. We're not intending that this tunnel would be operating 24/7, 365, moving a ton of water. it's actually going to be taking that water during high flow events. When there's so much water in the system that there is actually a need to move that excess water out of the system to prevent flooding locally, to ensure that water is being moved, strategically across the water system. And so you can see, as an example, just wanted to show you, if we look backwards in time, when we had really, really, wet years, dry years, but we had wet storms that came in. So it could be a really dry year, not a lot of total snowpack, but we might have these crazy storms that come in for a good week or so. And what do? That water would have otherwise be lost to the ocean. But instead, if it's coming through when we're in drought, a bunch of, calls for conservation are happening, state of emergencies might be happening, we would be able to actually take that water. And so you could see in these years, we could have been able to pack away 543 additional acre feet with DCP back in 2013. And you can also see in 2015, we could have gotten an additional 310,000 acre feet. So it's important to understand that it's meant for the high flow events, not just the wet years. So it could be a very dry year when we really need water, and now we have an opportunity to pull it off the system when we get really crazy week of intense rain and snow. So where is this project today? Obviously, any big infrastructure project takes a ton of effort and energy to go through the planning processes. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with, CEQA, permits, and everything that goes into the importance of planning a project properly. It does have a massive footprint, but it's underground. But it does have the implications of going in other people's backyards. And so how does all of this comport or come together in a big planning effort like this? Here's a lovely planning chart for you, but I just want to show you there's a number, because this is a massive infrastructure project, there are a number of permits and there's a number of planning documents that are required both on the state side and the federal side. And you can see over the course of the last 3-4 years, the planning efforts, including the environmental impact report, including the permits associated with the species that are in the delta, so those biological species that are impacted or could be impacted, we want to study those and make sure we get the proper permits so that it's operated in compliance so it doesn't adversely impact the fish. And then also looking at other state requirements as well. There's been a lot of engineering and geotechnical work as well. Anything this massive, tunnel underground, you have to study the soil, you have to understand how you would build it effectively with very zero risk. And so there's been a ton of that, and that's the orange one down there. It also informs how to affordably and safely build it. So the more geotechnical work you get, the better you understand how could I draw out some efficiencies, design this better, engineer it better, therefore lowering the cost and optimizing the operation long term. So geotechnical work is really, really important. We've also been working a little bit, and there's a JPA that has been set up that's been working through a number of these efforts with Department of Water Resources and State Water Project contractors, including MET, looking at innovations, just really seeing how can we think about tunneling differently in this space. And they've actually done a ton of outreach to the communities in the Delta to talk about, okay, what do you see are some challenges or things that you maybe wouldn't like about this project, and why is that? Whether it's noise or it's dust or construction activities, or let us know, what are you hearing, what are you seeing, what are you thinking, and how can we integrate into both our planning efforts and our final design, construction, and operation your thoughts, your perspectives, minimizing any potential community impacts or even community concerns. So the law requires you do it through CEQA and EIR, but they've gone a step beyond that to really work with those communities even further. So how much money does it take to do an effort like this? Well, I'm going to tell you, on average, it's about 10% of any major infrastructure project, minimum, if it's not complex, for planning and engineering. They're well below that marker right now, but it is the earlier phase of the development. It's a total right now of, for Metropolitan, that we paid in the last 4 years, $141.6 million. So we actually do pick up a lion's share of the cost. So you can see how important it is to us in Southern California. We're half of that water that comes through the system. Southern California, the entire region. So of course we pay about half of the cost of this. But I will tell you, they have Department of Water Resources, and these are the other participants, all the other state water contractors across the state. They have essentially, with this money, completed what they have said that they would optimally complete at this time. So they have been on budget, on track, and on schedule. That's pretty phenomenal for such a big project like this. It's very common for any project to go off schedule, but the bigger and more complicated and complex it is, they could have a lot more hiccups in the road, or potential things could happen. But essentially, they have done well with our money and in terms of its efficient use of it, which is good. So as they move forward, though, into the next, several years, there'll be 3 or 4 coming up here, they're gonna go into some of the harder phases of the planning and the permitting. And so with planning and permitting, there comes litigation, there comes concerns about making it through what's called the Delta Stewardship Council, which is a very important entity in the Delta. It's a state agency that basically says this project conforms to the Delta plan, and it's under the Delta Reform Act, a very important act that was passed for the Delta. There's also other water rights permits. So the State Water Resources Control Board does permit any major project that comes through the Delta or has a diversion off of any of the major rivers. And so this project does change some of its diversion points to north of the Delta, not taking more water, but at least pulling it from a different location. So they have to go through a water rights hearing, which has begun. They have already put in an application for this, and they're already planning and working through what will be potential hearings. Metropolitan has already submitted a policy statement and told the state board why we believe this project is important to our region, why we believe this project helps shores up our long-term water supply. So there'll be a number of water agencies stepping up in this process. Also, I want to share the Department of Water Resources, when they went through this process with the previous iteration of the project, the Twin Tunnel, there was a ton of opposition. There will be a lot of opposition this time around, but they did something unique this time. They reached out to some of the biggest water agencies that opposed it across the state of California. They reached out to the Westlands Water District. They reached out to the Friant Water Authority, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, the Sacramento River contractors. So they reached out to these very, very large water agencies that have a lot of pull with, like, let's say the federal government, because that's where they get their water, and they struck settlement deals with them before going to this hearing. So what I can say is the department has tried really hard this time around to really get ahead of what would be really challenging issues in that permitting process and be very strategic in making sure that those settlements were done in advance so that there won't be opposition from other loud voices in water that are very powerful and important to California water as well. So our board had a lot of discussion about this, but these risks are real. So they really do need to manage them. And if they get through these risks and they're diligent about getting through them, strategic about getting through them, they can secure those permits. Then we're going to understand what the risks and benefits of the final project will be for final construction and implementation. We'll have an updated cost estimate, and they're working through those innovations today. And then in 2027, it is anticipated that we'll be back in front of our boards having a conversation about the final stages of this project to go to construction. So this is a really pivotal time. The next 2 to 3 years will be some of the most important to make this project come to life. So Metropolitan, I think we spent about 6 months last year, starting I want to say May or June, starting to just begin with the basics, talk about the State Water Project, why it's important to Metropolitan, its affordability, everything I talked about in the beginning. We had the Department of Water Resources come in, talk about it. We had Carla Nemeth there to talk about it, her executive team to talk about it. Then we slowly started moving into Metropolitan staff talking about it and kind of giving the Met perspective to our board members. And then we started to really dive into what this project was. And our board, essentially by the end of the year, had to deliberate, do we continue with this project or not? Do we continue investing the money in it? Knowing it's a large sum of money, knowing that the budget is tight, it's difficult to come up with large sums of money right now, but also knowing the vitality and the importance of this. So the board in 2024 not only had public workshops with every voice you can think of, from business to NGOs and everything else, but they essentially came together in the end and identified that this project truly is still a viable choice to be studied and looked at for consideration long term. And so the board did come together. It was a huge moment. There was a lot of skepticism because there was a lot of concern from our board members, and it really went back to those risks. It went back to, can you really get all those permits? Can you do it on time? Can you get through litigation? Because in the past, those have been stumbling blocks, and the department had really struggled to get through them in the past. And so Met Board asked the hard questions. Wade Crowfoot came down, the secretary, sat at our board on the day of the vote, not only gave the final sales pitch as to why the state of California, the governor, feels this project is monumentally important to Southern California, but the board actually asked some really hard questions too. Really had to stand there and say what their commitment was to our region. If we put up our ratepayers' money, what guarantees do we have? And so what we came up with was a solution that not only the whole board can get behind, but some accountability measures. We actually said, you know what, state, we're going to continue paying you, but we want you to stay on schedule. We'll continue paying you, but you can't have all your permit processes take a bunch of water benefits away from it either. We're not going to put money there if we know the project isn't going to be affordable still. So there were a number of key things that came out of that board deliberation that have now put the pressure in a healthy way onto the state administration to deliver in the next 3 to 4 years. So we know that these dollars will be spent well and we'll get what we need out of it. So the Metropolitan Board in 2027 could have another really important conversation about final implementation. And so the final board vote, 98.76%. So there was a lot of skepticism in the beginning if we even had a majority. Did we even have over 50% is where we started last year. But through those deliberations, through those hard conversations, through the back and forth with the state administration, the board ended up coming together with a 98.76%. So one dissenting vote, small vote. I think it was more on principle than it was on the actual issue, but we do have a lot of follow-up associated from this to make sure we've heard from our board and we as staff are going to execute their direction. So a lot of strong leadership here. This board really came together in so many ways. I don't think I've ever seen in my career this much public debate and back and forth, but it was so healthy, and in the end, we came out ahead. I really think we landed in the spot where we're being diligent, we're being fiscally responsible, and we're also still looking to plan for the future. And so here's just a snapshot of some of the other agencies across the state of California that are also doing board votes. The ones that are checkmarked in green have already taken their votes. We do have a very important partner in the Central Valley known as the Kern County Water Agency. They are currently deliberating this month with their member agencies, and they'll be taking their vote. So that'll be a big one because they're a big ag interest. But aside from that, we are seeing across the board everyone stepping up and doing affirmative votes, most of which are majority votes, if not 100% votes, which is really great. That concludes the presentation today. I really hope that this gave you some insights, both from California Water all the way down to Delta Conveyance, where we're at. And I'm ready for any potential questions, and it's absolutely been a pleasure to talk about this topic today. So thank you.
Do we have any questions for Nina? Yeah. Yes.
You know, we're paying for unfinished water a little over $900 per acre foot. Do you have an idea how much this project will add to that cost?
Yeah, we're looking at that now. In fact, at Metropolitan, we are going to be looking at the increment costs of the associated project. The project itself is sitting at about a $20 billion price tag. But it's going to be spread over, and they're looking, state of California is actually looking at whether or not it gets bonded in a 30-year, they're even looking at a 100-year. So the affordability question is still yet to be seen. So we're being very careful at Metropolitan to not presume the dollar per acre foot cost and how it's going to hit the rates, because how they're going to finance, they're actually, you know, the state heard all of us, including Kern and ag interests on this project. We can't afford to continue to have, you know, crazy astronomical prices because we have to pass that on. So they're actually saying to us, the state of California, let's look at creative financing mechanisms. So we don't have the exact dollar per acre foot cost increment yet, and that's because they're looking at the creative financing options. There's also a desire by the state administration to look at a long-term federal participation. It's not there today, but what that can mean is bringing in federal dollars to offset the cost of the project as well. They're also looking at other beneficiaries. Could there be other ways this water could be purposed or utilized for the tunnels that's outside of just water supply? If you look at some of the other major infrastructure projects in California, they're multi-benefit. You know, they take the water supply and they purpose it for things like the environment or disadvantaged communities, et cetera. So there are some other creative ways of looking at not only paying for the project, but financing it. So we did not publish or put out a dollar per acre foot right now because we would be pursuing how it would be financed, which is a really big question that both the finance folks at DWR and even our financial teams at Met are working on. Our board is asking us questions about how do we look at the various mega infrastructure projects Met's contemplating, whether it's Pure Water, whether it's Delta Conveyance or sites. And we will be trying to do our best in the coming year or two to really talk about that more and try to put together some scenarios. But like I said, we want to be really thoughtful and careful to make sure that we're looking at it with all the caveats of exactly what that financing might look like. So more to come, to be continued, but that is part of the planning efforts ahead.
Sure, no more questions? Okay, all right. Nina, that was fantastic. Please give her another round of applause. And before we conclude, I want to try to give a real life example of how the Delta Conveyance Project would benefit the Three Valleys service area. As you may or may not know, Three Valleys is one of the 6 state water project dependent areas of Metropolitan, which means portions of our service area can only have imported water access to state water project water, not Colorado River water. So let's go back a couple years. A few short years ago, we had 3 consecutive extremely dry years, which resulted in a 0% allocation on the state in 1 year. And what we had to do to respond to that is we had to flip our operation completely around. Whereas when we're flowing water downhill from our treatment plant under normal operations, we had to flip it around and actually pump water uphill to serve the cities of Laverne and the city of Claremont portions of our service area. All of us water engineers and all our operators that are here, we like water to flow downhill and move by gravity and not with expensive energy with pumps, right? So that was a huge impact on us. But as Nina showed on that graph, if the Delta Conveyance Project would have been in place during that time frame, and she demonstrated that if it had been in place and during wet years, more water could have been stored in the San Luis Reservoir, such that if we had those consecutive years, that water was there and available for storage to be released into the state water project system, and we could have avoided all of the drought contingency planning that we had to do as a result of that. So that's a real world example of how that would really impact us. And as a follow-on to prior to Metropolitan's approving of the $141.6 million, our Three Valleys Board approved a resolution in support of the Delta Conveyance Project about a month prior to that in November of 2024. Because of that very important vote, this project is very important to Three Valleys and its member agencies. So I'll conclude on that, and I do want to say thank you all for being here, and Nina, again, thank you for taking the time to present to us. And one last thing, if my directors can stick around, we got some pictures we'd like to take. So again, thank you everybody, and have a great day, and we'll see you in a few months.